As Christians, we're told that we should love our neighbors, and I think even non-Christians think this idea that we should help each other and love each other is really important. But what if loving our neighbor isn't really as much about good intentions as it is making a really big impact? This is one of the questions that JD and his co-authors explore in this recent book. And I'm joined by JD today. We're going to discuss Christian effective altruism. And his new book is called All the Lives You Can Change. So we're going to talk a lot about that. So JD, thanks. Thanks for joining us.
Thanks
And
for having me.
yeah, absolutely. I'm super excited to talk about this. It's a
Me
topic I'm
too.
very passionate about. And I just wondered if we could start maybe just could you tell the audience like a little bit about yourself, who you are, what you do?
Yeah, I'm JD. I direct Christians for Impact. We do one-on-one career advising to help Christians change the world. It's all free because we're a nonprofit. One of our projects is effective altruism for Christians. We want Christians to embrace effective altruism, at least as a tool that helps us to better love and serve our neighbors and to do it more effectively. We think that, there's a lot of things that Christians are doing in the world that does good, but we don't just want to make a difference. We really want to make the greatest difference possible given what we've been given from God. And we see that as good stewardship and also really exciting because the best ways to do good in the world are like tens or hundreds of times more impactful than average. And I think that's a missing piece right now in the Christian world.
Great. So you've sort of previewed this already, but maybe just like specifically, can you tell us what is effective altruism? And then also what motivated you to write this book for Christians specifically? Because if you kind of look at the movement in general, you don't necessarily, it doesn't scream Christian, at least like on the face of it. So what is effective altruism and why should Christians care about it? Or why do Christians need to read this book?
Yeah, so effective altruism. I don't know if how many of the viewers have seen that logo. It's like I should have one for videos, right? It's like a heart inside of a light bulb, and that is supposed to represent combining the heart of doing good, the good intentions, the compassion for one's neighbor, with the mind, the light bulb, the good ideas, and evidence and reasoning. So, in one line, effective altruism is using evidence and reason to find the best ways of doing good, and then taking action on that basis. It's an idea, but it's also a movement. So there are thousands of individuals who might even call themselves effective altruists. These are people for whom this idea is a driving paradigm or framework for their life. There are organizations that are trying to put it into practice, trying to save lives as cost effectively as possible, trying to research the most impactful interventions for funding, for somebody's careers. The whole point, though, is to use evidence, reason, careful thinking to do good better. And why this Christian book? So one idea within effective altruism, which I think isn't unique to effective altruism, it's just one that EA's effective altruist stumbled upon, is that when we want to make an impact in the world, we don't just want a symbolic effort, something that everybody else is already doing, that if we throwed our towel in the ring, that we would be just like, we wouldn't actually be a difference maker. We want to be difference makers. We want to make the world better than it would have otherwise been, better than the counterfactual. We have a philosophy audience here. I think they'll like that. And so we looked at the Christian landscape and we saw that there wasn't any book about effective altruism. Me and my co-authors, that is Dominic Roser and David Zhang, there was no book about Christian effective altruism, despite the fact that so much of effective altruism is an extension of Jesus's teachings about loving God and loving neighbor with all of our heart, soul, mind, and strength.
Yeah, that's great. Okay, so this brings me to like a question I've wrestled with, and I think, and I do in many ways identify with the effective altruism movement. But you kind of gestured at this idea that you see effective altruism in the teachings of Jesus. And I'm a philosopher. I know you're very interested in philosophy as well. And so I guess like one thing I've wrestled with is to what extent is effective altruism kind of implicit in Christianity? Is it something that we can read off the Bible? Or is it kind of something that we need like some extra biblical tools to sort of discover? I think the altruism bit, this idea we should care about other people, that's very clearly in the Bible. Any Christian would be on board with that. But like, why? Like, where do we get this effectiveness bit? Is that something that's also, you think is in the Bible? Do you think there's like biblical passages that support it, but other like people talk about the woman who lavishly, at the feet of Jesus pours out this expensive perfume, and what, and like Judas is like, we could have given that money to the poor, right? Like Judas kind of sounds like an effective altruist there a little bit. So I guess what like to sum up the question, do we get the effectiveness bit from scripture, or are we kind of bringing in philosophy or economics, and kind of taking that to get this like broader thing where we get like altruism and maybe some of the effectiveness from scripture, but then like we use some extra biblical tools to like kind of get the full picture of effective altruism?
That's good. Effective altruism is many things. So I want to be as clear as possible about what is and isn't flowing directly from Christianity. I think the honest answer is that much of this does flow from Christianity. And the most important essential parts of effective altruism, this core idea that I shared, using evidence and reason to find the best ways to do good, that is deeply, deeply Christian and comes from Jesus himself. Now, there are certain EA causes or lines of thinking or even movements in the world that I would reject as non-Christian because they might disobey certain Christian commands to be truthful or honest, or to not lie, cheat, or steal while trying to do good. FTX was a famous example of where somebody, under the guise of EA reasoning, did something that was deeply immoral. But so going back to the fundamentals of effective altruism, is it Christian? Is it from Jesus? Just taking this idea of radical compassion and generosity, right? That's completely Jesus. Like, Jesus says to the rich young ruler, sell all you have and give to the poor. Jesus says, where your treasure is, there your heart will be also, right? So many of us in the West have so many resources, not just money and time, but financial resources, especially, and spend so little. I mean, on average, even an American Christian only gives away 2 or 3% of their income every year, even though we're in the global 95th percentile of income. Is the median American is in the top 95%, right? That's incredible. But Jesus says, where your treasure is, there your heart will be also. A lot of effective altruists put forward this 10% giving pledge, which sounds deeply Christian, right? The 10% number comes from, in one respect, the tradition of tithing and tithing to one's church in New Testament, post New Testament times. That comes from a biblical model, but really this is just downstream of the heart of Jesus, that everything we have belongs to God. Everything belongs to God. And so when we're giving, we're actually giving from what God has given us, what really belongs to him. And God expects no less from those who've been given much. Much will be expected. I think generosity is absolutely from Jesus. Now, the effectiveness parts, does that come from Jesus? And that's maybe where more of the tension is. I think so. So Jesus says to love the Lord your God with all your heart, soul, mind, and strength, and to love your neighbor as yourself. One part of loving God is by using the brains he's given us to do good work, to do good philosophy research, right? That honors God and glorifies God in and of itself. But another way that we honor God is by serving our neighbor. Jesus says in Matthew 25, whatever you do for the least of these, you do unto me. Whenever you give food to the hungry, to the least of these, you've given food unto me. Whenever you give a cold glass of water, right, you do it unto me. And whatever you don't do for the least of these, you don't do unto me, right? So there's a clear compassion ethic within what Jesus says. But anyways, going back to effectiveness, we should love God with our heart, soul, mind, and strength. We should love our neighbor as ourselves. How do we love ourselves? If we want to do something good for ourselves or for our family, how do we do it? For me, as a thinker type, if I'm buying a new car, for instance, I'm going to spend a lot of time thinking carefully. Like, does this car have good mileage, right? Will it get me from point A to point B? Is it safe for my family? Does it last? Is it durable? What does Consumer Reports say? I'll do some research. I'll do hours of research, right? It's it's recipient focused. I want to make sure that me, as the recipient of this car, and my family are better off for getting this particular car. And I'm going to research to make sure that I find that out. That's just that's just actually loving me and my family well, right? So often when we do that for other people, we don't do that research. We give to whatever makes us feel good. We give to whatever seems good or sounds good or pulls our heartstrings, but isn't actually others focused. If we were really concerned, deeply concerned about the other and their welfare and their well-being, of course we would research. Of course we would do lots of careful reasoning and analysis before making a decision. In the real world today, if we do that, it will actually do tens or hundreds of times as much good for our neighbor. So actually not researching and not looking into the evidence reflects a certain indifference or apathy for our neighbor. And I can't imagine Jesus being for that. One more scripture that pops out is this passage where Jesus commands us or commands his disciples as they go out to be wise as serpents, but shrewd, to be, yeah, wise as serpents, but innocent as doves. And I think that's a Christian effective altruist distinctive, that even as we're seeking to be shrewd and wise and discerning, we also should be innocent and compassionate. We shouldn't forget the neighbor right in front of us and the way that we can model Christ even with those in our midst.
Yeah, I totally agree. I think there is a lot of really important scriptures that, of course, we would all agree we should care about other people, we should be altruistic, but also do support the importance of effectiveness. And I'm curious if you would agree with this too, but like I think at the same time, like it's also okay to like use the tools of philosophy or economics or whatever to bolster this idea of, and that doesn't mean we go like full blown utilitarian or consequentialist or whatever, right? Like we're not just saying all we care about is consequences or what, but like yeah, like bringing in some of those tools also to think about like what charities we should give to or how we can effectively help our neighbor. I want to say like that is okay too, right? So I think yeah, you're nodding, so it sounds like you would agree. But yeah, I want to say like it's the Bible and philosophy, and the Bible is of course fundamental for us as Christians, but that doesn't mean we can't use other tools to like make smart decisions and even figure out like how to obey Jesus well. Like the Bible, of course, is our main tool for that, but there's like other tools that we can use at the same time.
Yes.
So
And
yeah.
this matters because, well, for several reasons. One, it really is the case that the best charities are tens or hundreds of times better than average, just like the best startups. It's like a winner takes all situation, right? We're seeing this right now with Anthropic, right? Its yearly revenue just went from like a couple billion to 30 billion in 1 year, and it's just quickly overshooting some of the smaller AI firms. And why wouldn't that also be the case in the charity world? That is actually what we see at the cost to save a life. You know, in the West, the US government is willing to invest about $6 million to prevent a death. There's a estimate, I think it's within the FDA or the USDA, the statistical value to save a life. And it's really what the government is willing to fund in programs that, in expectation, prevent a death for an American citizen. Globally, if we look at the best evidence on how much it costs to prevent a death from malaria, from whooping cough, from some preventable disease that we know how to stop, it costs about $4,000 to $5,000. So that's actually about 1,000 times less than what we are willing to spend for people on our own borders, which we should be willing to spend, right? We should be willing to spend a lot of money to save a life in our own borders. It seems strange if everybody matters equally to God. If God cares for this sparrow, how much more does he care for us, right? If everyone is of infinite value to God, why wouldn't be willing to spend just 10% of our income to save perhaps multiple lives of someone who would otherwise die across the Atlantic Ocean?
Yeah, great. I think that's a really good point. And it brings me to like, I guess, a objection that I think I hear sometimes to effective altruism that I think is maybe worth bringing up, which is like, to what extent, like, let's say we're like committed to like effective altruism or even like a Christian strand, to what extent are we required to just view everyone equal? Is that sort of part of effective altruism? I mean, there's of course like this intuitive idea that we shouldn't just care about people in our community or people in our country, but people in other countries as well. But do we have to view them all as like equally, or is it okay to maybe like pour some extra money into our own country, or even more intuitively like our own families? Like can I spend a little bit more money on my kids that I'm not spending on kids overseas? Is that okay? Is that technically against effective altruism principles? Like what do you all say?
So some in effective altruism, the movement, will endorse radical impartiality, right? They'll say that it doesn't matter who's experiencing a thing. What matters is that we maximize the good experiences or welfare. It's tentatively quite welfarist, that what matters most is the well-being of somebody. Really important to somebody's well-being is that they experience flourishing. A human might experience flourishing, an animal might experience a kind of flourishing, and detrimental to that flourishing is their suffering. And so effective altruists that embrace radical impartiality might say that it doesn't matter who's experiencing this. What we want to do is maximize this across all sentient conscious beings, right? And I think that's helpful on the margin to move in that direction when we're so concerned about our immediate, the walls of our immediate neighborhood and sometimes quite blind or indifferent to the huge needs of the world, despite how much we can do to help. Really, pennies on the dollar can transform somebody's day. That seems misplaced. But at the same time, we do have partial duties to our family. So, Paul says, I believe it's in First Timothy, that whoever doesn't provide for his own family is worse than an unbeliever. That maybe hit harder 2,000 years ago than it does now. But there's clear commands to honor your father and mother, to take care of your own household, right? And if not you, then who will, right? So I fully affirm that. And as a father, of course, I love my son. I want the best for him. I'm going to, even a bad father, Jesus says, is going to give a good gift to their child, right? How much more will the children of God, the sons of light, right? How much more are we already inclined to care for our own household and our own family? I think the Jesus ethic is something radical. It's calling us to do something that nobody else is doing. It's calling us to care about strangers, enemies, right? In the Good Samaritan passage, Jesus is showing that our neighbor are those that we would consider enemies, that we wouldn't even talk to. Those are people we should be willing to sacrifice money, time, putting them on, right? These are people that we're called to love. And to me, that makes Christianity much more radical, much more interesting, and more compelling as well. And Christianity argues that we were that once to God, and God loved us anyways. So actually caring for people besides those we're inclined to care about naturally reminds me of the kind of love that, Jesus would have had for me. If I met Jesus 2,000 years ago, I would not have been the most lovable person, right? I might not have recognized him as God. I might have, um, I might have been one of the people in the crowd crying, person, like kill him, crucify him, right? And yet Jesus says, forgive them. They don't know what they do. Jesus would have loved me despite my differences, despite the fact that, I'm some American who went in a time machine and yelled, crucify him. Anyways, I think it's that kind of other focused love, regardless of who they are, that we should be moving in the direction towards. And effective altruism is really helpful in getting us there.
Yeah, that's great. So I think what I like about what you said is that it's not this black and white thing, right? It doesn't have to be like full impartiality. We treat everyone exactly the same. It doesn't have to be like total partiality and we just like ignore everyone outside of our own community. But there's somewhere in the middle is maybe where we could fall, where we say, yes, like very clearly there's these like Christian motivated, Christ-centered reasons to like love people everywhere, love people very different than us. There's neither Jew nor Greek, slave nor free. We're all one in Christ Jesus. At the same time, of course, we should take care of our families, and that will probably involve, putting more resources and time towards them than we do just random strangers. But we care about random strangers too, and so it's kind of like I almost think there's these caricatures of effective altruism, and there are effective altruists like that. Probably some people are probably committed to like a radical impartiality, but I think you can be an effective altruist and also like learn a ton from the movement without having to just be fully and radically impartial, but maybe like move in that direction. Because I do think you're right. A lot of us are probably, we tend to like the partiality end of the spectrum, whereas like we could probably do better, yeah, to like care about, like it's easy to not think about suffering in other countries that we're not seeing right in front of our faces, right? It's easy to not think about people we're not interacting with every day. And so thinking more about those things, and as our world's increasingly globalized, I think it's like a little bit easier at least to be aware of that. But yeah, like putting time and resources towards helping people that are not in our immediate circles, I think is super important. And I really like that you emphasize that.
Yeah. And the call to love your global neighbor well is not a call to ignore your local neighbor, right? Being a good, effective altruist does not give you excuse to be a bad Christian, right? And this is maybe a helpful way to think about it. You could imagine somebody who donates 50, maybe imagine somebody who donates like 20% of their income to the Against Malaria Foundation, which is one of the leading effective altruist charities. They provide insecticide treated bed nets to folks in sub-Saharan Africa who are at risk of getting malaria. And for about $4,000 or $5,000, you can prevent a death. You can prevent a couple hundred cases of malaria. That's a wonderful, beautiful thing. Somebody giving 20% of their income can probably save over the course of their life roughly like 100 lives. That's huge. I mean, that's like 2 school buses full of kids, right? That'd be a beautiful thing. But imagine that person, waking up every day, going to their job that they're doing because they're going to donate 20% of their income to the global poor, pass by every day their next door neighbor, right? Who's very hard to love, who's a little bit annoying, who, is well off, relatively speaking, but is very lonely and asks to spend time with them and to talk with them and just wants a friend. And they're literally your next door neighbor. I think there's a temptation of effective altruists to kind of just like blaze past that person, right? I mean, and especially if you're temperamentally inclined that way, right? I think effective altruism, a temptation of it is that it can give you an excuse to to, um, to focus on only being a global neighbor and not also being a local neighbor. But the Jesus ethic is all of these, right? So I really don't think it will cost you your donations in your career to be nice to your neighbors. I don't think so. This
Yeah.
being said, I think effective altruists are really wonderful and lovely, very warm, but maybe that's because we talk about philosophy and not about the tulips in the front yard.
Yeah, yeah. And I think, I mean, one thing you talked about in the book I thought was helpful was trade-offs, right? Like, because we have limited time and resources, we can't help everybody and we have to make hard decisions. But like, some of these cases are not trade-offs. You can donate a ton of money and be nice to your neighbor. You know what I mean, right? So it's important, like, as we're thinking about trade-offs, and as important as that concept is, to also think about, like, is this actually a legitimate trade-off, or is this something like these things actually pull against each other or not? And like in most cases, like being a nice person is not pulling against,
And
other
yeah,
things.
and I think
So
it comes from
yeah.
a place of like, do you actually love the people you're trying to
Yeah,
serve? Like,
totally.
can that person who, the effective altruist who blazes to work to give 20% to the global poor, if they actually hate their next door neighbor, like
Yeah.
they and they dislike them deeply, their personality, they wince every time they see them because they know they're just going to distract them from, working hard to buy malaria nets. But actually, they just don't care about that person and their well-being the way that Jesus would. That's a problem, right? And I don't think that's how Jesus would live. So, can that person be a good effective altruist? Sure. Can they be a good Christian? I Nobody's a good Christian in one sense, but I think there's work to be done.
Yeah, like following the ethics of Jesus to their best of the ability or something, with God's help, of course, and God's grace. Yeah, absolutely. Okay, I wanted to kind of go into something from the book I found really interesting and maybe talk about a couple like upshots of it. Some of them will be interesting and controversial, but I liked this ITN framework. Is that, yeah, the ITN framework. And it's a framework that basically helps us think, given some of the things we've been talking about, wanting to help others, but also do it effectively. Where do we put our time and resources? What, like, this is kind of like a heuristic to help us figure that out, given sort of some of these values and priorities. So I'd love for you to talk about the framework in general, and then maybe give us some of the specific examples you go over in the book, because I found those pretty insightful as like, this is something like that does well given the framework, and maybe this is something that doesn't.
Yeah, of course. So the world is full of problems. It can be overwhelming. Our newspapers show us problems every day. The latest ones in Iran or in our government, or what's happening in Nigeria. I mean, there's so many things happening. It's like, what do I focus on with my career, with my money? So we share this framework that's actually originally developed by 80,000 Hours, a career advisory that helps people to distill down what are the most important problems to work on. Given my values and what I care about, how can I get direction on what to dedicate myself to? And so the framework is ITN. It stands for importance, tractability, and neglectedness. You can actually rank problems on this framework. So let's give an example. But first, let me unpack these. So importance is how important a problem really is in the grand scheme of things. People will rank this a different way, but a tentative way to rank it, I would suggest, is weigh it by how many people or animals does this problem affect, and how much does it affect them by. You might have different ways of measuring effect or estimating effect. One way is the welfarist way. How much does this promote their flourishing, their well-being? How much does this problem add suffering to their lives? Right? So you can measure up the size of a problem on those dimensions. The next category is tractability. That is a fancy word for solvability. Given the limited resources in the world, if you were to throw resources at that problem, time, money, influence, like political capital, could you actually move the needle on it? You could actually maybe do some math, like for $1,000 donated to this cause, what good is this going to bring about? For one more career that's really targeted and strategic in this direction, what will that actually bring about? And then N, neglectedness, is asking, given how important and how solvable this is, are there actually people right now doing something about this? is it actually something that I could do as well? So problems that rank high on ITN are usually really important problems to tackle. Let me give you an example. So if we take two problems, um, take one, American poverty, right? This is an important problem. There are many Americans that live under the official poverty line for a family of four. I think that's around $20,000 a year. And it leads to worse educational outcomes. It leads to worse health outcomes, leads to worse life overall, domestic violence, and also just a feeling of loneliness or just feeling less than. It's a big problem, and it affects something like 20, 30, like 30 plus million Americans. How tractable is it? How solvable is it? This is not super clear. Like the US government, through its social services programs, spends about $10,000 per American. $10,000 per American. That's a fair amount of money, but we still have poverty, right? We still have need. It's not enough. How neglected is it? Uh, Again, actually, I kind of blended the tractability and neglectedness here. It's arguably not super neglected in financial terms. It's also not neglected in political terms. The economy is a hot button voting issue, maybe like top one or two every single year. Both main political parties are fighting about it. It's hard to see where the quick wins are for US economic policy. Now, compare this to a problem like extreme global poverty. Now, that's defined as living on, they just updated it at the World Bank. Now it's like less than $3 a day. But let's take the old estimate, $2.25 or $2.20 a day. There are roughly 600 million people living at that level. And that's not just tough decisions about education or worse health outcomes. That's like deciding which of your kids you're going to send to high school because you can't afford to send them all. That's like putting rocks in. I heard a story of a mother who's a Give Directly recipient who would put rocks in her oven at night in front of her children so that they perceived her to be putting bread in the oven to be ready in the morning, but she had no bread. So she had to put rocks in the oven to pretend like there's food on the table, right? These are people who are I mean, the depth of need, and it's not something I deeply even understand. It's not something I've experienced. The trade-offs are unimaginable. There are 600 million people living in that situation today. That's 30 times more people than live in, roughly 20 or 30 times more people than live in US poverty, right? So for every one poor American, we have 20 or 30 people living in that situation. How tractable is it? We know how to lift people out of extreme poverty, right? We know how to, with cash transfers given directly to recipients, we know how to give them enough money to start a business, to put a roof over their head, to put bread in the oven, right? We know how to stop deaths by malaria. If you distribute insecticide treated bed nets, we have extremely good academic evidence that for about $4,000, $5,000, you can purchase enough bed nets to prevent many, many dozens of cases of malaria and one death. It's really tractable. And in terms of neglectedness, it's still super neglected. Before, okay, the US government used to be the largest funder of global development. USAID was funding about $60 billion towards global development, and it was the largest global player in the space. Even then, that's roughly, if I'm doing my math right, about $100 per person living in extreme global poverty every single year. So the largest global actor in this space is spending $100, whereas in America we're spending $10,000 per person, right? USAID was just defunded basically a year ago, so it's much, the situation is much worse than that now. I think if you compare these problems, it's abundantly clear that extreme global poverty is more pressing on the ITN framework. What does that mean for you? We argue that you should consider what problems your career and donations are solving. There's a good chance that if your career, your influence, your donations are directed at the world's most pressing problems, you're going to have more impact. And not just a little bit more, but probably, like I keep saying, tens, hundreds, maybe thousands of times more impact.
Yeah, that's great. So, first of all, I just think the framework itself is really useful and helpful both for deciding where to donate, also maybe where to, like, if we're spending time, choosing a career, all that, right? So, but I want to talk about two issues that I think are going to be especially interesting for a Christian audience. And one is going to be one I think Christians are going to be on board with, and then another is going to be one that I think a lot of Christians are skeptical of. Okay, so one, oh, maybe we'll talk about the more skeptical one first. So this idea of animals, you mentioned like how many people or animals um, does this thing affect? I'm actually personally like very on board with like that being a really important cause, and of course, no one is saying it's more important than humans or anything. That's not the claim. The claim is we should care about them and maybe even spend our time, donations, money to help them, right? But I find a lot of Christians are very skeptical of this, and it's actually kind of like not totally clear why they are skeptical. Like Christians, animals are part of God's creation. Like clearly we should care about animals. Maybe the idea is like, well, humans are like on a Christian framework, humans have souls or are made in God's image or are special in some way that animals aren't. So you could speculate about why Christians tend to be skeptical. But yeah, I'm curious, like, give me your best case. I mean, you can give a general case, but you can also like have a Christian audience in mind. Why should we care about animal suffering? Why is that a cause that we should not be promoting above all other causes, but at least one of the ones among the causes that we're thinking about?
I'll start with a question and a story from my life. So the question is, as Christians following in the way of Jesus, the way of perfect love, justice, peace, of self-giving love, right? How should we model ourselves in the world? How should we model ourselves and how we act in general? I grew up in a Baptist Mennonite household. For us, the self-giving love of Jesus and the pacifism of Jesus was front and center. And if you're not sure what to do, it's a good thing to ask, how would Jesus act in this situation? And the answer is usually with, I mean, the answer is always with love, with compassion, with justice, and with self-giving, self-sacrificial love, right? That's the model that we see in the cross itself. And as Christians, we follow in the way of Jesus. When I was 18, I started thinking about my life, kind of doing, kind of categorizing all the aspects of my life and holding it to the test of the cross. Is this aspect of my life reflecting the self-giving love and the peace of Jesus? And when I looked at my diet, I was a big meat eater, right? I saw that it wasn't for me. I was causing, by purchasing meat, I was plausibly causing animals to suffer unnecessarily. I didn't need to eat the meat in order to get my necessary calories or to get my nutrition. And animal agriculture is associated with all other kinds of impacts that are by no means peaceful. Climate change will hurt the global poor the most. Industrial animal agriculture is a hotbed of pandemic activity. Even COVID came from an animal market. So, how does my diet reflect the peace of Jesus? I heard an argument that actually in Genesis in the garden, it was vegetarian. God gave Adam and Eve the green herb to eat, and God gave them dominion over the animals, even as they were given the green herb to eat. And then you look at actually the visions of the new creation in Isaiah, 11, Isaiah 53. We see pictures of the wolf laying with the lamb, a cobra sitting in a child's lap, and of the whole world being made new. Part of that picture is peace between people and animals, right? In Revelations, we see this completed. In Revelations 22, we hear that there will be no more suffering, death, or pain in the new creation. And I thought about that. And I heard a guy, Greg Boyd, talk about this because he'd gone vegetarian. And he said, well, it seems like in Genesis, it was vegetarian. In the new creation, it will be vegetarian. And we're called to be salt and light. We're called to be the new creation here now. And so it looked like the new creation is vegetarian. So I'll go vegetarian too. And I thought, yeah, that's exactly right. It doesn't mean that the Bible commands everyone to go vegetarian. It doesn't. But it does seem to me a really important, or clearly a part of the new creation. And if it is more peaceful to the world and to animals and to people, why wouldn't I do it? So that's why I personally went vegetarian 10 years ago. You don't have to go vegetarian to care for animals, right? And we can talk more about why to care for animals. I mean, Proverbs 12 says the righteous care for their animals. Jesus uses animal imagery everywhere. Jesus is the good shepherd, right? Like, it'd be weird to think that like a good shepherd like Jesus would factory farm his sheep. What does that say about us, right? If our understanding of shepherding and of animal husbandry is industrialized abuse, and that is the model we ascribe to God and his relationship to us, these are just some things that come to mind.
Yeah, good. I don't want to spend too much time on this, but I will just say factory farming is one of those things that's I think easy to ignore because it's not happening right in front of your face. You go to the grocery store, you see the meat, you don't really think about where it came from, right? But like I would encourage you if you haven't, like even just Google or go on YouTube and look up some of the factory farming practices and the things that they do to animals, and it's actually really horrific. And like if someone took a puppy and did the things to it that we do to chickens and cows and pigs in factory farms, you would be absolutely horrified and you would want to send them to jail. But for some reason, we're okay with it when it comes to factory farms, even though we wouldn't be okay with it if it, I mean, really, I think we wouldn't be okay with it if we saw it in front of our faces, most
Yeah.
of us. And yeah, like I think going vegetarian is very admirable. I think that's really cool. And I also think another thing you can do is just spend a little extra to get like some, eggs or meat or whatever from a local farm where they treat animals well. There's a lot of philosophical debates here. What is it? Is it okay to raise an animal with a good life, but then
I
ultimately
think
to
so.
eat them?
I
I
think it's
think so
okay.
too. Yeah.
I think it's
But
called benign
like, people
carnivorism.
disagree on that. Yeah.
Yeah.
But like
Um,
at least but at least making an effort to think about where our food is coming from and what beings are being affected by that and know that unfortunately a lot of the meat and animal products from the grocery stores come from beings that are effectively being tortured and it's really really sad. So, I mean, I think just like not saying this is the only thing we should care about as Christians, but I think especially among Christians this is a very neglected topic.
yeah. Can I give a 1 minute thought experiment
Yes,
that I think
absolutely.
sums this
Yeah.
all up? You don't need to go vegetarian, but imagine you stumbled across a chicken in a cage, right? Uh, and the cage is maybe roughly the size of my book. And it's, the chicken can't spread its wings. It can't do what God created it to do. It can't dust its feathers. And you were told that for a penny, you could buy a little copper wire to open up the lock on the cage and set the bird free. How much? Yeah, like you could do that for say a day, right? The question is, would you do it? And I think almost everyone, basically everyone would say yes. For a penny, free a bird for a day. Yes. Actually, that's like orders of magnitude more expensive than what it actually costs to free a bird. Right now, if you invest $1 in the most effective ways to help animals, I believe corporate egg campaigns, you will free a hen from a cage for its entire life, 2.2 years. For $1, right? You can free a bird from a torturous life. It doesn't mean you shouldn't care for people. It doesn't mean you shouldn't care for churches or funding evangelism, right? Like to me, you don't, just as we don't get to say, oh, because the afterlife is infinitely important, I'm not going to care about people because here and now and their material needs because it's just nothing compared to the goodness of knowing God and the afterlife. In a similar way, you can't discount our requirement to care for animals because we're called to care for people. We have to care about all of it.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm going to leave it at that, but I do think it's really good food for thought and something that I think is neglected specifically by Christians. So, the second issue I wanted to touch on, and then maybe I'll ask one or two more questions and we'll kind of move towards wrapping up. Okay, so we have this ITN approach and this idea that we should use this to prioritize certain causes, but how do we think about evangelism in kind of this kind of framework? So, what kind of thing would this framework say about evangelism? And another thing you talked about in the book, it's actually something I'm just like personally very interested in, is kind of this maximalist approach to evangelism. So, in evangelism, should we aim to spread the gospel with or convert or however the maximum number of people possible, or should we do it more on like a qualitative, like instead of making it quantitative, maybe emphasize qualitativeness more? Or like how should we view evangelism kind of in light of effective altruism? And I will say, just like I know in the book you don't really take a stand on that, so it's okay if you don't take a stand on that, but
Sure.
I'd love to kind of hear some of the considerations for and against because it's
I'll take a
actually
stand
something
on it.
that sure, 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 yeah,
I
yeah,
disagree with my co-authors on this. I take a bit more of a maximizing approach to
cool,
evangelism and
yeah,
missions, which is maybe more aligned with how you see it. Um, yeah, oh, it's so funny. I saw this Babylon Bee post just the other day. It was, I don't know if you saw it, and you see this like very like professional dude sitting here, kind of holding his chin, and on the one side there's like people playing pickleball, and on the other side there are like impoverished Indians who are looking a bit lonely. And the question is, megachurch torn between supporting missionaries to India or adding pickleball courts.
Oof.
and
Oof,
and
that hits hard. Yeah.
it's like,
Yeah.
gosh, like it should not be this hard. It's
I
not.
know. I
Yeah.
know.
So,
Yeah.
but I think the decision we're kind of wrestling with here is like, should we support more church activities in the West, more pickleball courts, or even, less trivial things like more pastors, more church plants in America, or should we support missions globally? I think that's the question Christians need to ask in our globalized world. And it's just the case that it's roughly 50 times less expensive to fund a church planter in rural South Asia than it is in my suburb of Virginia. If all souls matter equally to God, why wouldn't we go? Why wouldn't we go to where there are more souls, right? I think to avoid that, like the implication of avoiding that is you start treating souls of like not equally, or you start acting as if you have no obligation or no duty to evangelize to the ends of the earth. But we see Jesus saying in Matthew 28, go to the ends of the earth. So I think it requires a very strange and very convenient alternative reading of what seems like the simple teachings of Jesus in the New Testament.
Yeah, good. And to add to that too, it's not just the cost of funding the church planner, it's also the number of people who have heard or not heard the gospel. I mean, that also seems like a relevant consideration. And like there's these like very unchurched, unreached groups. And then, I mean, of course there's need for the gospel in the West. No one is denying that. But I think like where I live, there's churches on every corner, you know what I mean? And so that's also like a consideration we're thinking about. It's like church, the availability of churches and the gospel, and in America compared to some of these other countries, that's also a really important difference we're
So
thinking
I
about. Yeah.
personally do give to my local church. I don't
Yeah.
give a huge chunk of my giving to my local church, but I
Yeah.
do give some. I take up a
Yeah.
seat in the pew, and I love my pastor in my church, and I want to see it grow. But we're kind of on the same page here. I've talked to my pastor about it, and they've actually invited in Ed Michelson, who runs this group called
Mm.
500K, which
Mm.
is supporting roughly 2,000 church planters throughout rural India. And they support them for about $1,000 a year, and that's enough that over 5 years, each year, for 5 years, so $5,000 over 5 years, they will plant roughly 2 churches, and each church has a few dozen people that come worship every single Sunday, and that's just orders of magnitude less expensive than my local church, and those souls matter just as much to God.
Yeah, I love that. I love that. Yeah. So this actually kind of brings me to my next question. So like we're thinking about this, we're thinking about like, wow, you can have such an impact overseas. There's all these things that other countries church planting can do, or we can help with global poverty by, malaria nets or giving medical care or whatever, right? And so I'm sitting here and I'm like, okay, should I go out and actually do that stuff? Like, how does this look for my career? Or there's this really interesting idea. This is another thing I'm really interested in is like earning to give. This idea that people talk about where you actually stay where you are and you try to get maybe not stay exactly where you are, but you try to get as high a paying job possible, even if that means staying in a Western country. But then you just give like your goal is to give quite a lot of your income to then these other causes. So how should we think about that kind of decision? Like, should I go become a missionary or go do medical missions or medical help to these countries, or should I earn to give? Is there generally like a better or worse option for people? Or yeah, how do we think about that kind of question?
I think it's great to think about. So if you're thinking about this question, which most people don't, then maybe you might start doing a baseline of how much good you could do in your current position by giving some sustainable number. So for instance, if you are a school principal and maybe you're earning $90,000 a year, if you give 10%, that's 9 grand. With that money, you could support a church planter every year in rural India. You could save a life from malaria. You could free 1,000 birds from cages for a year, and you could donate very generously to your local church a few $1,000s, and that would be a huge impact, right? You might maybe you'll just do one of those things, and it's a simpler comparison. You might compare the impact you would have in that situation to what you would have pivoting to a career working directly on global missions, or directly to help animals on factory farms, or directly serving the global poor. For a lot of us, that's not really possible given our duties to our families, or our the way that our careers progressed. And that's totally fine, right? That's totally good. You could still have a huge impact over your lifetime, right? Even like donating that every single year to saving lives over an entire career, you would save two busloads of kids, right? Is how much a school principal could save if they donated 10% of their income, two busloads of kids. And that's a huge impact. So I think that is the baseline. If you want to think more about strategic ways to pivot to a more directly impactful career, or to earn even more, maybe going into banking, or going into, big law or tech, go work for an AI, startup, get equity. That is really exciting. And we have lots of folks in our community that would love to give tailored, specific advice. We have general guides on our website. It's hard to get like specific advice from general guides, but we have a whole nonprofit that advises hundreds of Christians a year through decisions like this. And if you like, usually the answer is, if you have skills that can transfer, and you're agentic, you're willing to go out there, meet people, make things happen, even start something new, usually you will have more impact by pivoting from where you are right now.
Okay, so just to clarify, pivoting, just doing something different, or pivoting like going into the mission field? Because like one thing I've heard from some effective altruists, but I'm curious if you would agree, is that actually we should be aiming like it's like generally, not always, generally more effective to earn to give. But I'm curious, is that kind of your perspective or not necessarily?
It depends on who
Yeah.
we're talking to. So if we're talking to
Yeah.
somebody that is learning about effective altruism for the first time, I think the first step usually is like, give 10% of your money, take a 10% pledge,
Yeah.
donate 10% of your lifetime income to the world's most effective charities in your eyes. Now, if you're thinking next about what should I be doing with my career, usually if you don't have too many binding constraints and you're privileged enough to pivot, usually you can have more impact by pivoting if you can get a job working for a high impact charity in one of the lanes that you think are especially highly ranked on ITN. Now, there's all sorts of caveats and asterisks I want to add around this.
Yeah.
And a lot of people have been sort of thinking with EA lights already for a long time. So it's not like, exactly a night and day difference after they learn about it. But yeah, it's really individual. I wouldn't want to give like super, super general advice. So one way that it is discussed is, if you look at how much managers at highly impactful charities like Against Malaria Foundation or GiveWell, if you ask them how much they'd be willing to pay to get their top choice hire, it's actually several times the salary of that hire. The reason those people aren't paid as much is really because of labor economics, and because they can afford to hire those people for a lower price. It's just the case that the difference between the candidate, like their first choice candidate and the second choice candidate, is huge, like often hundreds of thousands of dollars of what they'd be willing to defer in yearly donations to get the better hire. And so if that's the case, you might think that for like a mid or a senior level role at an effective charity or organization, you should only earn to give instead of doing that role if you could earn to give hundreds of thousands of dollars a year. I think that's broadly right, but that's not where I would start. If you're already on the train, you're already thinking this way, ask yourself that question. What are the roles I could get at a nonprofit? How much would they be willing to pay to hire me in theory? Or like, how much would they be willing to lose if and then see if it makes sense relative to my effective giving earnings, or my effective giving. Yeah. Does
Yeah.
that make sense?
No, that's really helpful. Yeah, I think that's good. And I think too, I just want to emphasize again, you have a whole organization, Christians for Impact, that's here to help people think about
That's why,
the
exactly.
specific of
There's
their
nobody
situations.
offering
Yeah.
free advice for careers in the Christian space. Absolutely
Yeah.
nobody's doing it. You go to your pastor. It's always good to
Yeah.
talk to your pastor, but they have so many congregants. They don't know what the world looks like. It's changing so fast too. They
Yeah.
don't know what the job space looks like, right? We do. We talk to Christians every single day with this, and it's
Yeah.
really lovely. And we'd be honored if you, maybe we'll add a link to that if you're open to
Yes.
it. We'll add a link to get free one-on-one advising through Christians for Impact.
Absolutely. Absolutely. We'll definitely link that in the description. Great. Okay. I want to ask maybe one final question as we sort of wrap up here. So, let's say someone listens to this conversation and they're like, yes, I like this idea. Like, I want to be a more effective altruist Christian. What is one step they can take, maybe even this week, towards being more effective? I think buying the book is what I would throw in
Yeah.
there, but talk about that, and then talk about, is there any other concrete steps that you advise people that they can just take on a practical level as they're sort of getting into this, or if they're maybe newer to this?
Yeah, absolutely. So, yes, get all the lives you can change. This is the Christian case for effective altruism, or a Christian case, but it's really the only case that's being made in a published book right now. We published with Erdman's. You can get it right now on Amazon. And we're going to give you lots of tools, resources for navigating an impact driven life, not just to make a difference, but make the greatest difference possible with your life. Um, we recommend in this book to do several of the following. So, one, apply for free career advising. You can apply through Christians for Impact. There's also roughly a dozen others in the space that do this kind of work, not for Christians particularly, but just in general. 80,000 Hours gives great advice for careers that shape the direction of transformative AI. Probably Good gives great one on one advice for careers that will make a dent in the development space. Animal Advocacy Careers gives fantastic advice for pursuing a career that serves creation and helps show compassion to animals. There are so many organizations, and we link to a few of them in our book. Um, that'd be one thing. Get free one-on-one advising for your career. The second thing would be to take a 10% pledge. Give 10% of your lifetime income or more, right? And you can take a pledge to do this. Why pledge? I think pledges hold us to account, and they really force us to examine year on year how we're really doing. It's easy to get wrapped up in the motions and not really hold ourselves to account. And it can be more than 10%. My wife and I have settled somewhere higher than this, but we like to revisit it every year and challenge ourselves, pray over it, make these decisions together. You can also be private about this. So you don't have to tell anybody you're doing this, right? If you're convicted by what Jesus says about don't let your left hand know what your right hand's doing, why not take a pledge and just not tell anyone? But I have a link for where people can take an official 10% pledge that tens of thousands of people have made. There's a whole movement around this. And we'd invite you into this as fellow Christians doing this. The third thing I would recommend is just come to an event, come to an effective altruism conference or to one of our conferences. We have conferences in the fall. We're going to have one in Washington, D.C. and in London. The London date is already up there. It's November 28th, that weekend. The DC one will be in October, November, or December, but stay tuned on our website. That's bringing together hundreds of experts and thought leaders who are thinking about these ideas. Would love to chat with you about them. Effective altruism. If you Google effective altruism conferences, you'll find those. I can link ours as well. But yeah, number one, get the book, All the Lives You Can Change. Highly recommend.
Awesome. Great. Yeah, we will definitely link that book in the description, the career advice in the description, and then maybe there, I'll just link a general website, but places where people can find out about. I think the charity recommendations are really helpful. So if you do make a 10% pledge, there's some really great, both general charities and Christian specific charities you can give to that do really prioritize effectiveness. And that's actually something pretty much every year we look at in our giving, is who is being recommended, both by kind of the 80,000 Hours crew and also you all, the Christians for Impact people. And so the website just has a ton of really helpful information on it. And so definitely check that out. I also do want to say there's the 80,000 Hours podcast, which I really enjoy. And then also you have a podcast, Christians for Impact podcast. Is that what it's called?
Yes, I have a whole
Yeah.
new season I'm uploading any day now. So we've got a whole
Awesome.
12
Yeah.
episodes coming up. Yeah,
I've
thank you.
really enjoyed a lot of those episodes, so I will also encourage the audience to check that out as well. So yeah, anything else you would add to that list? Places where people can reach out and find more?
No, I
Okay,
think the number one thing is All the Lives You Can Change.
get the
It took
book.
4 years to write this book. It's been a labor of love, but we hope that with God's help, it will change the world.
Absolutely, absolutely. I've read it. I love it. I think it's really good. It's a really good balance of very accessible. Like, you don't have to be a person that reads academic journal articles to pick it up. There's tons of stories in it. At the same time, it is rigorous. It's not just like fluff, like it really does go
Right.
into
This
some
isn't
of the
just like
stuff.
vanilla
Yeah.
do good Christianity, right?
Yeah, absolutely. So anyway, highly, highly recommend this book. I like flew through it. I could barely put it down. So anyway, thanks so much, JD. Thanks for coming on. Audience, get the book. Check out the website for Christian for Impact. And yeah, we'll see you all next time. Thanks for joining us today. Bye, JD.
Bye.